In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. I'm going to talk about keyhole judgment. Keyhole judgment. Probably 100 years ago, when you had a key to a door, you could, the locks were such that you could actually see through them. So that's what they call it, a keyhole. And you can look into a room, and as you look in, the closer you get to your eye, the wider the perspective. But you can only get, so much perspective into a room and see what's going on. And recently, I've experienced several folks offering keyhole judgment. And in one case, I think it turned out fine because there was trust. In another case, because there's not trust, it didn't turn out so well. So what does that mean? Well, when we look at the life of another or the decisions that they make, all of us only look through a keyhole. I think the only ones who have more of a keyhole view is our spouses, or if you're in a religious community, maybe those you live directly with. But even then, sometimes you don't understand. And so everyone else has to sort of assess you through a keyhole. And they don't see what's outside of that vision. All they see is what passes right by that little glimmer of what's going on in life, I think it's one of the reasons why Jesus said, judge not lest you be judged, or condemn not lest you be condemned, is a better translation in my opinion. Because later in that same section, he said, don't throw your pearls before swine. So we're supposed to make assessments, but we're supposed to make assessments very cautiously based on the fact that we are going to be judged the way that we assess others. And if we're harsh and negative about it, or we assume the worst about someone, then potentially that's the way we're going to receive judgment. It's quite scary. It's an important admonition, especially realizing that the keyhole that we look through is missing huge amounts of information regarding why people make decisions, their perspective, what they feel. There's no keyhole into the soul. The only way you know what's going on in the soul is by what comes out, And so it's really important that we're super careful and that we make what's called a charitable assumption. A good friend of mine taught me this, and I love it. He said, in particular with respect to being injured by others, he said, a charitable assumption is that you assume that if they knew the injury they caused, or that they would cause the injury they did, they would have never have done it. I really love that. But a charitable assumption just in general is you just have a positive disposition generally towards everyone. And unless they prove otherwise over some pretty either severe short-term or consistent long-term, demonstration that they're not trustworthy, we should, give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm reminded in Corinthians where it says, love hopes all things, believes all things. And hope is a joyful anticipation of good. So when we look through a keyhole and we see something that we wonder about, we should have a joyful anticipation of good. Unless there's a track record of, nefarious activity that's really blatantly obvious from the person. We should assume the best. And if asked about it, relay the best. And interpret what we see through the keyhole with the most positive possible interpretation. If we do that, boy, will we have a beautiful community. And unfortunately, some of the most stressful experiences I've had in community are because of the opposite. Somebody peering through the keyhole, and because they don't like something, or because they're offended, or because they have a critical spirit, or they're prideful, or whatever, they judge very wholesome, well-intended, and well-lived values in a completely opposite way than they are in reality. which is quite crazy, right? But we've seen this in the church and persecution of the saints. We've seen it happen to Padre Pio and Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross and Saint Bruno and Saint Margaret Mary MacKillop. I think it's in Ireland or in Australian saint. And I just read a book called Persecution from Within, and it's, some people are just malicious and go after good people, but some are even well-intentioned and decent people, but who just don't have the wisdom or the personal self-discipline to, when they look through the keyhole and wonder, and the one that they're watching has a track record of nothing but integrity, to assume the best and to speak the best. And for that person, I fear, because their judgment isn't likely to go well. So I wonder, I'm asking you, and I'll admit, I'll just say it, I have made bad keyhole judgments, so I'm, guilty as charged. My tendency, though, is another problem, and that is I just tend to assume the best of people, and people start at 100 and then sort of come back from there, and I have to be careful not to do that with people, and then when I do, it's a painful adjustment for me. But I guess the question to you is, have you ever done that? And then you discovered that what was inside the room you were peeking into, what you initially thought was nefarious, was actually holy and good. And what did you learn from that? How is the Lord speaking to you in this idea of being careful how you judge, because your judgment will be with that same standard? It's a good time to think about these things during Lent. May you and I, please Jesus, always assume the best of others, and when we look through the keyhole, no matter what we see, is that a good prayer? No matter what we see. When we look through the keyhole, and be it that we see no sin, let's say it that way, no matter what we see, may we assume the best of others. May we live in that kind of peace and joy that comes from that kind of grace. May you know it yourself, and may Jesus Christ be praised now and forever.